Admiral Grace Holloway stood at the viewport of Sentinel-9, a deep space station floating in the cold darkness between Mars and Jupiter. She held a cup of coffee in her hands, still warm, and watched the distant blue dot that was Earth. It was a habit she had developed over 20 years of service. No matter how far she traveled, no matter how many stars she visited, that small blue world always called to her heart. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across the solar system like seeds scattered by the wind. Colonies dotted the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Mining operations pulled precious metals from the asteroid belt. Mars had become a second home for millions. But Earth remained the center of everything. 12 billion people lived on that ancient world, and every decision that mattered flowed from its governments and councils. Grace took a sip of her coffee and smiled. In 3 weeks, she would return home for her daughter's wedding. She had already picked out a dress, a simple blue thing that reminded her of the ocean. Then Earth vanished. There was no warning, no explosion, no flash of light. One moment the planet was there, and the next moment it was gone. Grace dropped her coffee cup, and it shattered on the floor, but she did not notice. She pressed her face against the viewport, her breath fogging the glass, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were telling her. Where Earth had been, there was nothing, just empty space and distant stars. The alarms started screaming. Officers ran through the corridors shouting questions that nobody could answer. Communication channels filled with static and panicked voices from across the solar system. Luna Base, the massive installation on Earth's moon, went silent within hours. Without the planet's gravitational anchor, something catastrophic had happened there. Grace forced herself to move. She was an admiral. People looked to her for answers. She reached the command center and found chaos. Young officers were crying. Veterans stood frozen in shock. On every screen, the same impossible image played over and over. Empty space where home used to be. Commander. Nathan Cole reached her through a crackling transmission from Mars. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but his voice was steady. He told Grace that they needed to act quickly. Without Earth's central government, the colonies would fall into panic. They needed to establish order, create a chain of command, keep humanity from tearing itself apart. Grace agreed. She spent the next 72 hours without sleep, coordinating with every human settlement she could reach. They established emergency protocols. They rationed resources. They tried to find hope in a situation that seemed hopeless, but hope was hard to find. In the weeks that followed, scientists searched for answers. They scanned the empty space where Earth had been, looking for debris, for energy signatures, for anything that might explain the impossible. They found nothing. The planet had not been destroyed. It had simply ceased to exist in their universe, as if someone had erased it from reality. Religions fractured. Some claimed it was divine punishment. Others said it was a test of faith. New cults emerged overnight, preaching that Earth would return if humanity proved worthy. Old faiths struggled to explain how God could allow such a thing. The political situation collapsed even faster than the religious one. Without Earth's authority, old rivalries resurfaced. The Mars colonies blamed the outer settlements for hoarding resources. The asteroid miners accused everyone of abandoning them. Within a year, the first shots were fired in what would become known as the Fracture Wars. Nathan Cole tried to hold things together. He formed a provisional government on Mars, inviting representatives from every human settlement. For a brief moment, it seemed like unity might be possible. Then the assassination attempts began. Cole survived 3 of them before retreating to a fortified bunker. His dreams of peace shattered. Grace Holloway watched from Sentinel-9 as humanity tore itself apart. She had lost her daughter in the vanishing, along with everyone else she loved on Earth. Some days the grief was so heavy she could barely stand. But she forced herself to keep working, to keep trying. Because giving up meant admitting that everything was truly lost. 10 years after the vanishing, the Velthri arrived. Their ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. Silver and elegant, moving through space with a grace that human vessels could not match. At first, humanity hoped they might be saviors. beings who could explain what had happened to Earth, or perhaps even bring it back. Those hopes died quickly. The Velthari were ancient, far older than humanity could comprehend. They had watched Earth's development from afar for centuries, curious about this young and aggressive species that had spread so quickly through its solar system. They had decided to wait to see what humanity might become. The vanishing of Earth changed their calculations. With humanity fractured and weak, the Velthari saw an opportunity. They offered protection to human colonies, security in exchange for submission. Some settlements accepted gratefully, desperate for stability after years of chaos. Others refused and tried to fight. The fighting did not last long. Velthari weapons could crack moons. Their shields could withstand anything humanity threw at them. One by one, the resistant colonies fell. Within 50 years, every human settlement in the solar system flew Velthari flags. Grace Holloway lived long enough to see it happen. She was 93 years old when Sentinel-9 finally surrendered. And she stood at that same viewport where she had watched Earth disappear. Now watching Velthari cruisers dock with her station, she thought about fighting. She thought about dying on her feet rather than living on her knees. But there were children on the station. Young people who deserved a chance to live, even if that life would be lived under alien rule. So Grace Holloway surrendered. And she spent her remaining years teaching those children about Earth, about blue oceans and green forests, about music and art and the stubborn human spirit that refused to die. She told them that Earth would return someday. She did not know if she believed it, but she knew they needed to believe it. Hope was the only weapon humanity had left. The centuries passed. Humans adapted to life under the Velthari dominion. They served on alien ships, worked in alien factories, learned alien languages and customs. They were not quite slaves, but they were certainly not free. The Velthari valued human creativity and problem-solving, so they allowed their human subjects certain privileges. But any hint of rebellion was crushed without mercy. Earth became a legend. Parents whispered stories of the blue world to their children at night. Artists painted images of oceans they had never seen. Musicians composed songs about forests and mountains and rain. The memory of Earth became almost religious, a sacred thing that connected all humans no matter where in the galaxy they found themselves. 2,000 years passed. Empires rose and fell. Stars were born and died. The Velthari dominion expanded across vast stretches of the galaxy, absorbing hundreds of species, becoming the greatest power the region had ever known. And then, exactly 2 millennia after the vanishing, sensors across the galaxy detected something impossible. A planet had appeared in the Sol system, exactly where Earth had been. The lost world had returned. High Counselor Zethvon received the report in his private chambers aboard the Eternal Dominion, the greatest warship the Velthari had ever built. His silver skin shifted through patterns of color that showed his emotions, something his species could not hide. Right now, those patterns showed deep concern. Earth had returned. He read the sensor data 3 times, hoping he had made a mistake. He had not. A planet matching Earth's exact mass and composition had appeared in the Sol system without warning. It occupied the precise orbital position where the human homeworld had vanished 2,000 years before. This should have been impossible. Planets did not simply appear out of nothing, but there was more. Much more. The planet was surrounded by structures that Velthari scientists could not identify. Massive orbital platforms circled the world, each one larger than most moons. Energy signatures poured from these platforms in quantities that made their instruments useless. The readings went beyond their maximum values and kept climbing, and there were ships. Thousands upon thousands of ships, arranged in perfect formations around the planet. Each vessel radiated more power than entire Velthari battle fleets combined. Z-A-A-N set down the report and walked to his viewport. He had ruled the Dominion for 3 centuries, longer than any High Counselor before him. He had crushed rebellions, absorbed rival empires, expanded Velthari territory by 40%. He had believed that nothing in the galaxy could threaten his power. Now he was not so sure. He ordered Admiral Crixon to take a reconnaissance force to the Sol system. 12 of their finest warships, crewed by their best officers, equipped with their most advanced sensors. Their mission was simple: observe and report. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Crixon was a veteran of 100 campaigns. His skin patterns showed confidence as he accepted the mission. He had fought species that breathed plasma and species that existed partially in other dimensions. He did not fear whatever waited in the Sol system. 12 ships jumped through hyperspace toward humanity's original home. The journey took 3 days. When they emerged on the edge of the Sol system, Crixon immediately knew something was wrong. His sensors showed the planet and its surrounding structures exactly as the original report had described. But they also showed something else. A single human ship was approaching his fleet. It was small compared to his warships, perhaps a tenth the size of his flagship. It moved with strange grace, almost organic in its movements, leaving trails of light behind it like a living thing. Crixon ordered his weapons officers to target the vessel, but hold fire. He wanted to understand what he was dealing with before starting a battle. The human ship stopped exactly 1,000 kilometers from his flagship. Then a voice filled every communication channel on every Velthari vessel. Speaking perfect Velthari language with an accent that did not exist, the voice identified herself as speaker, Anna Okanjo of the Terran Ascendancy. She welcomed the Velthari to the Sol system and asked them to state their purpose. Crixon responded with practiced diplomacy. He said he came in peace, seeking only to understand how Earth had returned after 2 millennia. He asked to speak with human leadership about establishing relations between their peoples. Hannah's response was calm but carried weight that made Crixon's crew shiver despite themselves. She explained that Earth had not been destroyed 2,000 years ago. It had been taken, pulled into a dimensional fold by an entity beyond current understanding. Time moved differently in that fold. While 2,000 years passed in normal space, Earth had experienced far longer. Millennia upon millennia, in a place where the laws of physics bent to human will. During that time, humanity had been tested, challenged, forged. They'd emerged as something new, something that still honored what they had been while reaching toward what they might become. They had returned to find their children scattered across the stars, living as servants under alien masters. This was unacceptable. Crixon felt fear for the first time in centuries. His skin patterns betrayed him, shifting to colors that showed his crew how frightened he truly was. But he was still a Velthari admiral, and he would not show weakness to these humans. He demanded to know what the Terran Ascendancy wanted. Hannah told him their demands were simple: the immediate release of all humans from Velthari control, the dissolution of Dominion authority over former human territories, reparations for 2,000 years of subjugation. Crixon laughed, though the sound was hollow. The Velthari Dominion had ruled this region of the galaxy for 50,000 years. They had absorbed hundreds of species. They did not negotiate with subject races, and they certainly did not surrender territory because someone asked nicely. He told Hannah that her demands were rejected, and that any attempt to interfere with Dominion operations would be met with overwhelming force. Hannah's response came after a long pause. She sounded almost sad when she spoke again. She told Crixon that she had hoped for a different answer. She told him that what happened next was not what the Ascendancy wanted, but it was what the Dominion had chosen. Then every system on every Velthari ship failed simultaneously. Lights went dark. Engines went silent. Weapons powered down. Life support continued, but nothing else worked. Crixon floated in darkness, listening to the panicked breathing of his crew, unable to move his ship or contact anyone outside it. After exactly 1 hour, the systems returned. Crixon immediately ordered a retreat, but before his ships could jump to hyperspace. Hannah's voice filled the channels one more time. She told him to deliver a message to High Counselor Zethphon. The Terran Ascendancy had shown mercy today. They had disabled his ships instead of destroying them. Next time, they would not be so gentle. The 12 Velthari warships jumped home, but only 11 arrived. The 12th, Crixon's own flagship, was held back. He and his crew were kept for 3 days, during which the humans did nothing but talk to them. They showed Crixon images of what humanity had become. They explained their technology in terms that made his best scientist weep with frustration. They fed him well and treated him with courtesy. Then they released him with a recording to deliver personally to the High Counselor Zethphon. Watched the recording alone in his chambers. Hana Okanjo appeared on screen, her dark skin marked with silver threads that seemed to glow from within. Her eyes held depths that made the ancient Velthari feel like a child. She repeated her demands. She gave the Dominion 30 standard days to respond. She expressed hope that bloodshed could be avoided, but made clear that the Ascendancy was prepared for war if war was chosen. And she made one more thing perfectly clear. The Terran Ascendancy knew where every human in the galaxy lived. They had watched over their scattered children for 2,000 years, even while trapped in their dimensional prison. They would not abandon them now. High Counselor Zethphon watched the recording 3 times. Then, he called an emergency session of the Dominion Council and ordered the largest military mobilization in Velthari history. The Dominion had ruled for 50,000 years by crushing anyone who challenged them. They would not stop now simply because some lost humans had returned with impressive technology. War was coming.
Oh.
And Zethphon intended to win it. He did not yet understand how wrong he was. The first battle of Proxima Centauri began at dawn. Standard galactic time. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the command deck of the Ascendant Dawn, watching the enemy fleet assemble on his tactical display. 3,000 Velthari warships had gathered, the largest military force the Dominion had deployed in 10,000 years. Their vessels filled space like silver locusts, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets. Marcus was 63 years old by appearance, though he had lived for far longer. His hair was gray at the temples, his face lined with the kind of experience that only centuries of life could provide. He wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. The Terran Ascendancy did not believe in such things. He had 40 ships under his command. Lieutenant Patricia Dunn sat at the weapons console, her fingers hovering over controls that could unleash forces beyond Velthari imagination. She was younger than Marcus, barely 2 centuries old, but she had trained for this moment her entire life. Her ancestors had lived as servants under alien rule. She intended to end that servitude today. The Velthari fleet began its approach. Marcus watched their formations with professional interest. They were good, he admitted. Their tactics showed 50,000 years of military experience. They spread out to prevent any single attack from destroying too many ships. They positioned their strongest vessels at the front, while keeping their command ships protected in the center. It would not matter. Marcus gave the order to advance. The 40 Terran ships moved forward in a simple line formation, making no attempt to hide or evade. To the Velthari commanders watching from their bridge viewports, it must have looked like suicide. 40 ships against 3,000. The humans were either insane or stupid. Admiral Crixon commanded the Velthari response from his new flagship. Having been given another chance after his humiliating encounter in the Sol system, his skin patterns showed grim satisfaction as he ordered the opening barrage. 10,000 weapon systems fired simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to sterilize a dozen worlds. The beams and missiles reached the Terran ships and simply stopped existing. Marcus watched the attack dissolve against his vessels' shields without feeling any impact at all. The technology behind those shields had been developed over countless millennia in the dimensional fold. It did not deflect energy or absorb it. It simply convinced the universe that the energy had never existed in the first place. Crixon ordered a second barrage, then a third. His officers reported the same impossible result each time. Enemy weapons were having no effect whatsoever. Patricia Dunn looked at Marcus with a question in her eyes. He nodded once. She pressed the firing command. What happened next was difficult to describe, even for those who witnessed it. Terran weapons did not fire beams or projectiles. They reached across space and changed things. Ships that had existed one moment simply did not exist the next. There was no explosion, no debris, no energy release. Reality itself was edited. The Velthari vessels were removed from the story. The first volley eliminated 500 ships. The second took another 800. By the time Crixon managed to order a retreat, less than a quarter of his fleet remained. The battle had lasted 17 minutes. Marcus Webb felt no joy in the victory. He had hoped the Veltheri would see the demonstration of power and choose peace. Instead, they had forced him to kill thousands of beings who were only following orders. He would carry those deaths for the rest of his very long life. But the battle served its purpose. News of the defeat spread across the Dominion faster than any official announcement could contain it. Subject species who had been quiet for millennia suddenly began to stir. The Kethre, a warrior race conquered 8,000 years before, started organizing resistance cells. The Omnary Collective began refusing to process Veltheri data requests. Even species that had been loyal servants started whispering about change. "Hi, Counselor."
Yes.
Zethphon received the battle report in stunned silence. His skin patterns cycled through emotions too fast to read. Fear, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been despair. He had built his entire reign on the assumption that Veltheri military power was absolute. That assumption had just died in the light. Of Proxima Centauri, his advisors urged different responses. Some wanted to negotiate immediately, to salvage whatever they could before the ascendancy demanded more. Others insisted on continued resistance, arguing that even if they could not win militarily, they could make victory so costly that the humans would settle for less than total surrender. Zethphon chose a third path. He ordered his remaining forces to consolidate around the most valuable human population centers. If the Terrans wanted their scattered children back, they would have to destroy millions of their own people to get them. It was a desperate strategy, the kind of move that only a leader facing extinction would consider. Zethphon told himself it was necessary. He told himself the humans would never sacrifice their own kind to defeat the Dominion. He was wrong about that too. Speaker Hannah Okonjo broadcast her second message to the galaxy 1 week after the battle. This time, she spoke directly to every human living under Veltheri rule. Her words reached mining stations and factory worlds, servant quarters, and prison cells. Wherever humans existed, her voice found them. She told them about Earth. Not the legend they had grown up with, but the reality of what it had become. She described cities that floated among clouds and forests that sang with light. She spoke of a humanity that had conquered death itself, that had transcended so many of the limitations their ancestors had accepted as natural. She told them they were not forgotten. The ascendancy had watched over them from beyond normal space, unable to intervene, but never losing sight of their scattered children. Every human who had lived and died under alien rule was remembered. Every name was known, and she told them what came next. The ascendancy would not be deterred by hostage tactics. They would not abandon their people simply because the Veltheri threatened violence. Ships were already being dispatched to every human population center in the Dominion. Those who wanted rescue would receive it. Those who wanted to stay and fight would receive weapons and training. The liberation had begun. Patricia Dunn listened to the broadcast from her quarters on the Ascendant Dawn. She thought about her great-great-grandmother, who had worked in Veltheri mines until her hands bled. She thought about her grandfather, who had been executed for teaching human children to read. She thought about all the generations of her family who had lived and died as servants, never knowing that Earth still existed, never believing that freedom might come. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. Marcus Webb found her there an hour later, sat beside her without speaking, offering the simple comfort of presence. They had both lost ancestors to the long darkness of Veltheri rule. They both understood what this moment meant. Tomorrow, they would begin the largest military operation in human history. They would face an enemy that had ruled for 50,000 years, an enemy that would rather see the galaxy burn than surrender its power. Many battles lay ahead, and not all of them would be as easy as Proxima Centauri. But tonight, they allowed themselves to hope. Earth had returned. Humanity was whole again, and nothing in the universe would prevent them from bringing their children home. Daniel Reyes had never seen Earth. His parents had never seen it either, nor their parents before them. For 7 generations, his family had lived on mining station Theta 7, a cold and ugly place spinning slowly in the outer reaches of Veltheri space. They extracted rare minerals from asteroids, worked double shifts in dangerous conditions, and died young from radiation exposure and industrial accidents. Daniel was 34 years old, which made him old for a miner. Most did not live past 40. He had accepted this fact the same way he accepted everything else about his life. Some people were born to rule, and some people were born to serve. That was simply how the universe worked. He had heard the stories about Earth, of course. Every human child grew up hearing them. Blue oceans and green forests, cities that sparkled with light, the air that smelled like flowers instead of recycled metal. He had believed those stories when he was young, the way children believe in magic and happy endings. He had stopped believing when he was 12. The day he watched his father die in a mining accident while their Velthury overseer complained about the delay in production. The stories were lies, Daniel had decided. Pretty lies that made slavery easier to bear. Earth was gone, destroyed or vanished or whatever had really happened 2,000 years ago. It was never coming back, and anyone who believed otherwise was a fool. Then the Terran ship appeared in orbit around his station. Daniel was in the cafeteria when the alarm started. He dropped his food tray and ran toward the nearest viewport, joining the crowd of workers who had gathered there. They all saw the same thing. A vessel unlike anything in Velthury records was hanging in space above them. Beautiful and strange, glowing with inner light like a living thing. The Velthury guards tried to maintain order. They shouted commands and waved their weapons, but even they seemed uncertain. This was not part of any protocol they had trained for. A shuttle detached from the strange ship and descended toward the station's main dock. Daniel pushed through the crowd, not sure why he felt compelled to see what came next. He reached the dock just as the shuttle's doors opened and humans stepped out. But they were not like any humans Daniel had ever seen. They moved with perfect grace, as if gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. Their eyes held depths that seemed to look through matter itself. They wore simple clothing without weapons. But somehow Daniel knew that weapons would not help against them. One of them was a woman, perhaps 30 years old by her appearance, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, looked at the crowd of miners with something that Daniel did not recognize at first. Later he would understand that it was compassion. The Velthury guards raised their weapons and ordered the newcomers to surrender. The woman glanced at them with mild curiosity, and they simply collapsed, falling into peaceful sleep without a shot being fired. The other guards saw this and dropped their own weapons, backing away with fear written across their alien faces. The woman walked through the crowd until she reached Daniel. She stopped in front of him and smiled, then introduced herself as Lieutenant Amy Chen of the Terran Ascendancy, asked if he wanted to come home. Daniel did not understand the question. He said he had no home. He had only ever known the station, the mines, the endless work until death. Amy took his hand. Her touch was warm, and something happened that Daniel could not explain. Images filled his mind, vivid and clear, like memories of a life he had never lived. He saw Earth as it was now, not the legend, but the reality. Cities that floated among clouds, their towers reaching toward stars. Forests that glowed with bioluminescent light, singing with sounds no human ear had heard before the transformation. Oceans clean and deep, full of life that humanity had created during their long isolation. He saw what humanity had become. They had conquered disease and aging. They transcended the limitations of flesh without losing what made them human. They lived for centuries, exploring the universe with minds that had been expanded beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined, and they had never forgotten their lost. Children, every human who had lived and died under alien rule was remembered. Every name was recorded. Every story was preserved. Daniel fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had believed the stories were lies. He had given up hope so long ago that he had forgotten what hope felt like. Now it crashed through him like a wave, overwhelming everything he thought he knew. Amy knelt beside him and put her hand on his shoulder. She told him that he was not alone. She told him that his ancestors were not forgotten. She told him that everything they had suffered had meaning because it had led to this moment, the moment when humanity came together again. All around the dock, similar scenes were unfolding. Miners who had spent their lives in hopeless servitude were learning that the stories were true. Earth existed. Freedom was possible. They were not abandoned. Not everyone reacted the same way. Some were afraid, too conditioned by generations of control to accept such sudden change. They backed away from the Terran visitors, unable to believe that anything good could happen without a price attached. Amy and her companions were patient with them. They did not force anyone. They simply offered the choice and waited for each person to decide for themselves. Over the following hours, shuttles carried miners up to the Terran ship. Daniel was among the first to volunteer. He had nothing on. The station worth keeping, nothing to tie him to a life of slow death. He sat in the shuttle and watched mining station Theta 7 shrink in the viewport, and he felt nothing but relief. The Terran ship was called the Rising Dawn, and it was the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen. The corridors were wide and filled with natural light. Plants grew along the walls, filling the air with scents that Daniel did not recognize. Everything was designed for human comfort in ways that the utilitarian Valkyrie stations never considered. A medical team examined each refugee from the station. Daniel learned that the radiation damage he had accumulated over 20 years of mining could be repaired. The chronic pain in his joints could be eliminated. The shortened lifespan that awaited every miner could be extended indefinitely. He asked how this was possible. A doctor named Samuel Park smiled and explained that the Ascendancy had had a very long time to develop their technology. Time moved differently in the dimensional fold where Earth had been taken. While 2,000 years passed in normal space, Earth had experienced something closer to 50,000 years. 50,000 years of research and development, of trial and error, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Daniel asked why they had come back at all. If they had such power, why not stay in their paradise and forget about the scattered remnants of humanity living under alien rule? Samuel's smile faded into something more serious. He explained that the Ascendancy had debated that very question for a long time. Some had argued for isolation, for focusing on their own development and letting the past remain past. But others had insisted that humanity was not complete without its lost children, that leaving their people in bondage was a betrayal of everything they had become. In the end, the decision was not difficult. Humanity had always been stubborn about protecting its own. That stubbornness had survived 50,000 years of transformation. When Earth returned to normal space, rescuing the scattered humans was never really a question. It was simply something that had to be done. Daniel thought about his father, dead in a mining accident while a Valkyrie overseer complained about production delays. He thought about his mother, working herself to exhaustion, trying to provide for her children. He thought about 7 generations of his family living and dying in servitude. He asked if those lives had mattered, if all that suffering had any purpose. Samuel put his hand on Daniel's shoulder, the same gesture Amy had used in the dock. He said that every life mattered. Every name was remembered. And the best way to honor those who came before was to build something worthy of their sacrifice. Daniel. Reyes looked out a viewport at the stars, the same stars his ancestors had watched from their prison station. For the first time in his life, he felt free. The liberation continued across the galaxy. Terran ships appeared at human settlements everywhere, offering rescue, offering hope. Millions of humans made the choice to leave their old lives behind. Millions more chose to stay and fight for the worlds they had been born on. Either way, they were no longer alone. Earth had returned, and humanity was whole again. The peace conference took place on Luna, Earth's ancient moon, now transformed into a center of diplomacy for the emerging new order. Great domes covered its surface, filled with gardens and meeting halls and spaces designed to accommodate beings from 100 different species. The gray dust that human astronauts had walked on, thousands of years before, was now covered with structures that would have seemed like magic to those early explorers. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered for the historic meeting. Subject species who had served the Dominion for millennia sent their leaders. Independent powers who had watched the conflict from afar came to see what would happen next. Even the Valkyrie themselves, humbled by defeats they still did not fully understand, sent their highest representative, High Counselor Zethvon, walked through the corridors of the diplomatic complex with guards who could not protect him, and advisors who had no advice left to give. His silver skin showed patterns of exhaustion and defeat that he no longer tried to hide. He had ruled the Dominion for 3 centuries, longer than any High Counselor before him. Now he would be remembered as the one who lost everything. The war had been short, but devastating. Terran forces had appeared wherever humans lived, always perfectly positioned, always exactly strong enough to accomplish their mission without excessive destruction. The Velthri had tried every strategy they knew. They had attempted ambushes and traps and desperate last stands. Nothing worked. In the end, the subject species had made the decision easier. The Kethri rebellion spread across 30 systems before the Dominion could respond. The Omnary Collective simply stopped processing data, bringing Velthri logistics to a standstill. Dozens of other species, seeing which way the wind was blowing, chose to switch sides while they still could. The Dominion was not destroyed in battle. It collapsed from within, unable to maintain control over populations that no longer feared its power. Zethphon entered the main conference hall and saw Speaker Hannah Okonjo waiting for him. She sat at a simple table with no guards, no weapons, no display of power. Her dark skin was marked with silver threads that seemed to glow softly in the light. Her eyes held depths that made the ancient Velthri feel like a child facing a teacher. They were alone. Zethphon had insisted on that, unwilling to let his people see him surrender to a species it once considered property. He sat across from Hannah and waited for her to speak. She was silent for a long moment, studying him with an expression he could not read. Then she smiled. And there was something almost kind in the gesture. Hannah told him that the Ascendancy's terms were ready to present. She asked if he was prepared to hear them. Zethphon said he was prepared, though his skin patterns betrayed his fear. He expected harsh terms. Enslavement, perhaps, or genocide. Or the kind of brutal punishment the Velthri had inflicted on so many others throughout their long history. It was what he would have done in their position. Hannah's terms surprised him. The Velthri would withdraw from all former human territories immediately. They would release any humans who wished to leave their space. They would pay reparations, not in resources or wealth, but in knowledge. Sharing the scientific and cultural achievements they had, accumulated over 50,000 years of civilization. But they would not be destroyed. They would not be enslaved. They would not even be punished beyond these measures. Zethphon asked why. After everything the Dominion had done, after 2,000 years of subjugating humanity's lost children, why show mercy? Hannah was silent for a long moment. Then she told him a story. When Earth was taken into the dimensional fold, humanity found itself facing something beyond comprehension, an entity of such power that entire galaxies were less than dust to it. This entity had been watching humanity for a very long time, curious about a species that combined such capacity for destruction with such capacity for love. The entity had tested humanity. It had given them unlimited power and unlimited time, then watched to see what they would become. Some civilizations that faced similar tests had destroyed themselves. Others had become monsters, using their power to dominate and destroy. A few had simply given up, fading away into comfortable extinction. Humanity did none of these things. They struggled and fought and made terrible mistakes. But they kept growing. They kept learning. They kept reaching toward something better. After 50,000 years, the entity had reached a conclusion about humanity. They were worthy of returning to the universe. Not because they were perfect, but because they never stopped trying to be better. Hannah told Zethphon that the most important lesson humanity had learned during their long transformation was about the nature of strength. True strength was not measured in destruction, but in creation. Not in domination, but in elevation. Not in revenge, but in justice. The Velthri had ruled through fear for 50,000 years. They had crushed anyone who challenged them, absorbed anyone who might threaten them, and controlled anyone who served them. It was the only kind of power they understood. The Ascendancy offered a different vision. A galaxy where species helped each other grow instead of competing for dominance. Where ancient enemies could become allies. Where the mistakes of the past did not have to define the future. Zethphon listened to all of this with growing confusion. His entire understanding of power and politics was based on the assumption that the strong dominated the weak, that mercy was weakness, and compassion was foolishness. Hannah was describing a universe that made no sense to him, but he accepted the terms. He had no choice. The Dominion was broken, and even if he wanted to continue fighting, his people would not follow him. The war was over. In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Terran Ascendancy did not seek to rule. They sought to guide. Species that had been stagnant for millennia found themselves offered technologies and knowledge that opened new possibilities. Ancient conflicts that had seemed eternal were mediated and resolved. The competition and domination that had defined galactic politics for so long began to give way to something new. Not everyone welcomed a change. Some species resented human influence, even when that influence was offered rather than imposed. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. The galaxy was not suddenly transformed into paradise, but things were better than they had been. And they continued to improve year by year, generation by generation. Daniel Reyes, the miner who had never believed in Earth, eventually became one of the Ascendancy's most celebrated diplomats. He spent centuries helping other subject races find their own paths to freedom and growth. He never forgot where he came from, and that memory gave him compassion for those still struggling to believe that better things were possible. On the anniversary of Earth's return, now, a holiday celebrated across 1,000 worlds. He would stand on a balcony overlooking the blue marble of humanity's homeworld. He would remember the day Lieutenant Amy Chen had asked if he wanted to come home. He had not understood the question then. He had believed that home was a place you were born,